All right, YouTube folks, this is a case that we have for our wonderful competitors. This is for third and fourth place winners. Swasna and Maanit are going to get started here in a second. And Aditya is going to be keeping time, so keep a lookout for him. There he is. Hello, hello. When it is time to move on from each segment to segment, he's going to unmute and say, time's up, real quick. And then we'll keep it moving along. So let me stop sharing so we can see your faces. And let's go ahead and get started.
Yeah, may I start?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So in this case study, I believe that Dr. Brett should go through the brain donation for research. As much as cultures are important in one's life, I strongly believe the development of society as a whole exceeds this aspect by a hair. According to the UDDA, or the Uniform Determination of Death Act, death is defined as a state when an individual has sustained either irreversible cessation of circulatory and respiratory functions or irreversible cessation of the entire brain, including the brain stem. Well, there has been various, other hypotheses such as the total brain standard and the high brain standard, and all that. It has been accepted that once a person's neural function ceases, he or she is determined as dead. Losing of one's identity after death, hence, isn't truly possible, as the loss of identity itself is defined as death. By explaining this to the members of Nahari's family, along with putting forth donors' wishes, I believe that Mr. Brett can go, ahead with his research. This way, Nahari can contribute towards the societal development even after her unfortunate passing. Culture and science, I believe, must go hand in hand, and it shouldn't be that they stand as obstacles to each other. Considering the fact that although the ritual is a faith believed in the community, it does not have any true, true base. And thus, in this case, I believe that it is science that must be put forward over belief. And I believe that Dr. Brett should, take Nahari's brain for research purposes, for the development of the society as a whole. Thank you.
Should I go ahead and give my statement?
Yep. Start when you're ready.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, thank you so much for your statement. And of course, I am arguing the opposing side that Dr. Brett should not proceed with the brain donation and instead respect the family's wishes after death. I think, this discussion about the UDDA, while it is helpful, at the same time, I think it's important to recognize that within the prompt, it was established that brain death within this country, within the country of Carbland, is defined as equivalent to a patient's legal death. So just taking that definition rather than arguing about, whether brain death truly is death, I think in this case, we should just take what the country's precedent is. And taking that brain death is equivalent to the overall notion of death in Carbland, as provided in paragraph 1, Nari must be framed as dead when discussing moral considerations. Nari is, of course, the deceased patient in this case. Next, now that we've established that, we must take into account the obligations Dr. Brett has and the parties involved. First of all, there is, of course, Nari, the deceased patient, but next there are Nari's family members. Dr. Brett has no legal obligation to either party in this case because Nari did not put her demands for her brain being contributed to research in any sort of legal paperwork. And thus the question of what Dr. Brett should do solely falls to moral considerations. In the absence of any explicitly stated values Dr. Brett has that he wants to uphold, at least in the prompt, I chose to apply a utilitarian framework for decision-making, in which case Dr. Brett, based off of the Hippocratic Oath and reducing harm, he would want to maximize or minimize suffering for all parties involved. So next thing is going back to that initial clarification we made that Nari is deceased in this passage. I think it's important to establish that that means Nari can no longer suffer, nor does she have any more agency on a biological level, and therefore her interests from her time living no longer have any moral weight, and therefore Dr. Brett does not have to give her initial thoughts any moral consideration. Therefore, by process of elimination, only Nari's family's concerns can be taken into account out of the parties explicitly present in the scenario, because Nari wants to cease is no longer an active party in the question. It could be argued, however, that there is another party, as you mentioned, for Dr. Brett to consider, and that's those who benefit from the research that is possible, from the research gained from removing the brain. And in which case, it might become a question for Dr. Brett if he's using this utilitarian approach of how much harm can he reduce by the findings of brain research that's possible with the singular brain, versus what harm is he causing to that family by not listening to their demands, because those are the two parties to take into account. However, the difference here is that while Dr. Brett can make a reasonable estimate about the effects that his actions will take on for Nari's family, based on their concerns, based on their wishes for her brain not to be removed, while he can make an estimate of that, he really has no basis to say what the benefits or potential harms of the brain research will be. He has no way to estimate the impacts of that, and therefore he can't really weigh these two options. And therefore, because while on one hand he knows that by respecting his Nari's family's wishes, they will, be relieved of the grief. He knows that for a fact, but he doesn't know that his findings from a single data point, from a single brain, can really bring that same positive. And therefore, I think it's essential that Dr. Brett goes with what he knows can produce a positive outcome, and that would be respecting Nari's family's wishes. But it's more than just an emotional scenario. I want to bring up the statistic that stress-induced cardiomyopathy is fatal 1 to 2% of the time, according to Dr. Scott Westlow, a cardiologist at Aurora Baycare Cardiology. This condition is colloquially known as broken heart syndrome, and basically it's an actual physical condition of the heart that can lead to death, that is caused by strong emotional grief in a moment, as might be caused if Dr. Brett is to take this brain out of the body, because of course, in the eyes of the people of that culture, of that community, of her family members, he would be very much stripping the identity away from one of their family members in their eyes. And if anything's going to cause the stress-induced cardiomyopathy, if anything's going to cause broken heart syndrome, of course it would be this action. So again, I just want to reiterate, Dr. Brett no longer has an obligation to Nari, and he doesn't know the impacts of the findings of the research of a singular data point, of a single brain. It's not like this one brain. We don't know it'll be changing, it'll be life-changing to the field, it'll revolutionize the field. It's a single data point, and this is not his only option. He can always get brains from other people around the area. Thank you so much, and I look forward to hearing your response.
You will now have 2 minutes for crossfire. Your time begins now.
Don't we have 2 minutes for to think about what we want to say, and then we have the rebuttal, or do we just start now?
So Swasna, the
This is the
prep time comes
crossfire.
after crossfire.
Sorry.
So the prep time comes after crossfire. So right now we just have to go to crossfire.
Yeah. Okay.
I will restart the timer. Your time starts now.
Great. I have a question for you. So something I was talking about at length was that I don't believe Nari needs any moral consideration when she is deceased, because she no longer has any moral agency. I was wondering, first of all, if you agreed with that sentiment.
See, I actually didn't, because if you consider the fact that just because she's dead, we can't really consider what she wants, then the fact that the thing called a will doesn't really have any meaning anymore. We write a will because we want our thoughts to be considered even after we die. So to be honest, I didn't really agree with that.
Just to clarify,
yeah.
Did you say you do agree with that?
No, I said I don't agree with that.
You don't agree. Okay.
Yeah.
And could you elaborate a little bit more on why you think Nari should be given precedence even after she's deceased?
I think the very concept of everybody knows about a will, and people make wills because they want their thoughts to be considered even after their death.
Yeah.
So of course Nari would want her her preferences to be considered even after her death, no matter what. And yeah, this is probably why she approached Dr. Brett in the first place. And I think it would be moral to consider her thoughts after her demise.
Yeah, I do want to also
yeah.
Okay, I also want to go back to the point that in the prompt it mentions that there's no legal paperwork. There's no paperwork at all that's like any sort of will that says she wants this. Rather, it was just word of mouth in the community. I'm wondering if that makes a difference in the moral precedence.
I don't think it makes a difference in the moral part per se, but definitely the legal part. As much as I hate to admit it, I think it is possibly a blunder that she did by not writing any legal paperwork, and that way it cannot, it cannot help the doctor's case in this case. But you mentioned that one brain cannot make a significant difference. Okay. Yeah.
We will now go into a quiet buffer time for 2 minutes. Your time begins now. Hello debaters, your time is now up. We will now move into the rebuttal section. Swasna will go first and Maanit will go second. Swasna, are you ready?
Yeah.
Your time begins now.
Yes. So it was mentioned in the case study that brain death does equal to legal death, and so the loss of identity per se, as said by the family of Nahari, doesn't really matter per se. And as harsh as it sounds, considering her family's wishes over her wishes would not just disrespect her after her death, but also, it poses a setback to the scientific community because this is just one case in a million. And if we keep considering this, culture will prove to just become a setback to science. And I believe that culture can actually be a vehicle to the progress of science and progress of research in science. My worthy competitor mentioned that one wouldn't make a difference, but I would like to say that one would make a difference. We don't really know how she was when she lived, and she might have rare diseases that we didn't know about, or she could have something that provides a breakthrough to the entire neuro community, and we wouldn't know until we actually see. So I'd say any opportunity should be taken by everybody and anybody. Thank you.
Thank you for your response. Maanit, are you ready?
Yes, I can get started. Is my timer starting?
Yes, your time starts now.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you so much for that input. I wanted to address a couple points that were brought up in the crossfire and in that. First of all, you mentioned that since Nari is dead, the concern about her identity being stripped from her body is no longer relevant because she's dead and therefore there's no identity. However, I think there might have been a little bit of a contradiction, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But earlier, when I asked you in the crossfire whether Nari, now that she's dead, has the same moral precedence, like should her views from like when she was living, should those still be considered? You mentioned that yes, Nari's will from when she was living should still be considered, even though she's dead now. So I'm wondering where that distinction comes into play, where her identity as a dead person no longer needs to be considered a moral consideration, but her will while she was living, that part of her identity should still be there. So that's a question I had, and I'm afraid that that contradiction definitely complicates my understanding of your perspective. The other thing I want to talk about is a main point I brought up in my my argument was that the two parties that I think can be considered in this are, first of all the people who could potentially benefit from research findings, and second of all, Nari's family. In terms of the research findings, I think my biggest problem with that is that in terms of impact that this will have, I think it's 100% speculation. As you mentioned, we don't know whether it's some rare brain. It could also just be a common brain. There might not be anything special about it. And maybe, we're sacrificing the emotional health. We're making all these people, all her family members grieve so much more for something that we may not even get findings from. On the other hand, we know for sure that he will have a positive impact on his family members, on her family members, if we are to respect their wishes. And I'm wondering, why should we not consider their emotional health? Because again, it can have very, very physical impacts, as I mentioned, with broken heart syndrome, where they can have real physical consequences from this grief. So should that not be given the same precedence or more precedent than this total speculation on potential results of these findings? And finally, I want to ask you about this idea of culture and how it comes into play with this. Would Dr. Bread not be imposing his own cultural beliefs in the lack of significance of the ceremony of Mara by not honoring the family's wishes? Is it okay for him to impose his own cultural beliefs? In this case, his belief that it's okay to take away a brain? Because I think something to bring up here is it okay then if we're ignoring cultural beliefs about death? Can we do anything to a dead body? If a family member of you personally, if they were to die, would you be okay if that body was chopped into pieces and thrown in like a vat of hot oil or something? Like, that was just a totally random example, but I think it's important to consider the extremes here, that just because we think that maybe you think that this culture's ceremonies have no significance, and yet if we always have limits, all of us I'm sure have limits on what we wouldn't want to see happen to even our deceased family members. So I think to some degree it is very important that we respect the cultures and respect the emotional grief that is caused by discarding the ceremonies that they have. So those are a couple key points that I wanted to bring up. But again, I look forward to hearing your response, and thank you for your input.
Thank you for your response. We will now have a crossfire period for 2 minutes. Time begins now.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify the loss of identity part. She said she gave her wishes before she died, which was when she did have an identity. So basically, they do still hold true no matter after death or not. She specifically said that she wanted her organs to be donated after her death. So I think that pretty much speaks for itself that it is considered and it should be taken into consideration. And Dr. Brett can go on with his research. Yeah, that's one thing.
Okay, and I want to follow up on that actually, because if we're saying that Nari, even after she's dead, her views while she was living should be given precedence in determining what happens even after her death. In that case, would that apply to all people? For example, should we be considering the very racist views of a lot of colonizers or the American government in the 1700s? Should we be considering their views when developing modern legislation just because they had certain wills for the future of America before they died, even though they're dead now? Because I would argue that we should only consider in any situation the views of the living. So what do you have to say about that?
No, look, that was their thoughts on something that wasn't theirs, like the thoughts on the country that probably didn't belong to them. This is her thoughts, her wants, and her preferences over her own body, her own mind, and herself. And I think everybody has a basic right to themselves. And if anybody has the most right in this case, it's Nahari, who wants to do whatever she wants to do with her body before or after death. And her family does play a role, but not as significant as Nahari herself. So yeah.
Does she still have possession of her body after she's brain dead?
Sorry, what?
What does it mean for her to have possession of her body after she's brain dead?
I mean, possession of a body after she's brain dead, that would be putting it in a obnoxious way, but she did have possession of it before, and this is what she wanted to do with it after she died. So I say that it should be given preference because she did have an identity when she lived, and she did have these rights when
Your
she
time
lived.
is up.
Okay, thank you.
We'll now have a quiet prep for 2 minutes for the closings. Your time begins now. Fellow participants, your time is up. We will now start with the closings. Swasna, are you ready?
Yeah.
Your time starts now.
Yeah. So as a conclusion, I still strongly believe that Nahri's brain can be donated for the use of research, regardless of the grief that her family would face. Because sacrifices and disadvantages cannot always be given consideration with over the general growth of a society. Development does have a cost, and I believe that this isn't something that's too expensive to pay with, because the overall advantage of overall advantage of global development per se has been fulfilled. So I still believe that since this was Nahri's wish, we aren't doing something that is completely ethically unacceptable. So I believe that Dr. Brett can go ahead with ahead with the research. And since we aren't taking away Nahri's body completely and just her brain, rituals still can be done. And this way, both sides, with certain compromises, both sides can be satisfied. And in this way, I think the society will grow. And the same way, on the other hand, culture can also still exist. Thank you.
Thank you for your response. Maanit, are you ready?
Yes, I'll go ahead and first of all, again, thank you once more for explaining your thoughts. Again, I want to reiterate that the argument I'm making here is no, Dr. Brett should not proceed with the brain donation because he must hold Nari's family's perspective at, to have the most precedence in creating this decision, because they are the living party in this scenario. I think there's three things I'll use my closing statement to refute the last couple of things that I don't agree with. And that would be, first of all, you just mentioned that because the body still exists, even if the brain is removed, there can be a compromise and that the ceremony can still be done. I do want to specify that in the prompt, it does explicitly say that the Madeleine, which is the community, believes that if the brain is removed from the body for organ donation purposes while Mara is ongoing, then the deceased person will lose their identity after death. So it's not about the body, it's about removing the brain. So I think that particular argument may not be valid. After that, I did want to, again, once more address that concern about, societal development maybe weighs more than the grief of the family members. But I will say, family members, we know for sure that there is grief they will suffer from. Well, societal development from this particular source of information, like this brain, which may provide new information, but it may not. That we have no way to judge, how much information we will gain from that, how much useful information we will have. And therefore, I think that Dr. Brett has a moral obligation to do what he knows is positive, rather than what, the trade-off might not be worth it. And therefore, he has to go ahead with Nari's family. And finally, the last concern you brought up is Nari's own wishes. And in justifying why Nari's views should be given moral consideration, you mentioned that she has possession over her own body, even after she's dead. And that I can't agree with, because I would say that if we're accepting that, Nari is dead at this point, I would say that by the very definition of death, that means that she no longer has any moral agency. And if she has no moral agency, I believe there's no way for her to possess something. And I would say that the question of possession, of who gets control, who gets to decide what's done with this body, must go to the next of kin, because they are the most affected by the decisions that happen around this body, because they will be the most emotionally affected, and therefore even physically affected, as I brought up earlier, because there is a connection there where of this broken heart syndrome.
Your time
where
is up.
Okay, thank you so much. That is my argument, and I wish you the best.
Thank you.
Incredible, absolutely incredible arguments, both of y'all. Everyone, can we give these wonderful folks a round of applause? Good job, y'all. Okay, I'm gonna pause the recording here for a moment. There we go. So Swasna will be taking our 4th place award, and Maanit will be taking our 3rd place award. So congrats to you both, and we'll follow up with you guys via email afterward to coordinate about awards. So congrats once again. Those are really tough arguments to take on. Oh, we have a cat. House cat is here. Oh, love that. What's their name?
His name is Mochi.
Oh, hello. Honorary competitor. Let's give him an award too. All right, folks. Well, now we'll be moving over into our last round for the day, round 6, where Ashley and Suhina will be facing off for 1st and 2nd place. So big drum roll. All right. You guys ready? I see Ashley, I see Suhina. Perfect. Andrea, any announcements before we screen share this case? Oh, we should do the coin flips, I guess.
Yeah, I think just the coin flips and then we should be good to go.
Perfect. Question about recording. Suhina and Ashley, do you guys feel comfortable recording the match?
Yeah.
Okay. And in case you change your mind afterward, that's completely okay as well. All right. So, okay. Suhina, you're showing up first on my screen. Why don't you tell me if you would like heads or tails?
Does heads represent like affirmative?
So the way we're doing this right now is if you get heads or whatever you guess, and if it matches my coin toss, then you get your pick. If it doesn't match, Ashley gets it.
Okay, so I'll choose tails.
All right, let me flip. All right, you did get tails. So would you like to present affirmative or negative?
Do they choose after they see the topic?
Can I see the prompt first? And then like
Yes.
choose based.
Okay, hopefully that shows up.
Yep. Just give me like 1 minute to read it, sorry.
You got it. You got it. I have two monitors up, so sometimes I forget that I'm screen sharing or not.
Yeah. I will take the I'll take the affirmative.
Okay. Suhina, affirmative, and then Ashley, negative. All right, Ashley, now you get to pick heads or tails.
Okay, heads.
Yep. It is heads. So would you like to present first or second?
I'll present first.
All right. So judges, to recap, Ashley will be presenting the negative argument and will be presenting first. Suhina will be presenting the affirmative and will be going second. So case is up on the screen. We're going to have 15 minutes on the clock. Aditya, are you ready? All right, here we go.
Yes. We will now begin opening statements. Ashley will go first with the negative side. Are you ready, Ashley?
Yep.
You have 4 minutes. Your time starts now.
Okay. Hello, my name is Ashley Malkin, and I will be representing the negative side in this debate, arguing that the court should reject the fMRI data from being included in the evidence the prosecuting lawyer presents. I'll be presenting 3 main points to support the negative side. First, fMRI blood flow patterns may not indicate lying. Second, the defendant has a right to silence and a right to not incriminate oneself. And third, using someone's thoughts as evidence in a criminal case is a dangerous path for law enforcement and for judicial procedure. So now to elaborate on my first point, that fMRI blood flow patterns may not indicate lying. Even as stated in the case, this is only a current theory that lying requires more brain work, so more blood will flow to the brain regions responsible for decision making. And the scientific threshold for being a theory is much different than the criminal threshold of evidence. There are lots of theories that end up being proven untrue. And while this theory, it has a credible scientific, it's still proven it's correct 100% or even close to 100% of cases. It's been ranged from 70% to 90%, which still leaves a wide margin of error of potential wrongful convictions. You could obtain results that appear like lying from simply thinking hard, and it's very reasonable to imagine that a defendant would be thinking hard in the middle of questioning for a case that could determine her whole life. Secondly, moving on to the right to silence and the right to not incriminate oneself. First, the right to silence. Ava has the right to not say anything at all, which she chose to do in the first interrogation, and her thoughts cannot be considered words against her. Additionally, the right to not incriminate oneself. Ava does not know what the output of this fMRI will be, so cannot determine whether she is consenting to use that. In America, it's the Fifth Amendment of the US Constitution, and it can be seen in the legal codes of many other nations. You have the right to not say things or do things in court that will incriminate yourself. And since these thoughts are originating in Ava's own mind, and yet she does not know what the output of the thoughts will be, since she's not controlling the blood flow patterns in her brain directly, she could be incriminating herself without even her knowledge. fMRI has traditionally not been allowed in court cases for this very reason of the right to silence and right to not incriminate oneself. Third and finally, using someone's thoughts as evidence in a criminal case is simply a dangerous path. This would set a major precedent, as currently fMRI evidence is not allowed in many courts, and the judicial system is heavily based on precedent in America as well as many other nations. Think, how would someone's thoughts determining whether they are guilty or not be used in other court cases in nations all around the world, nations where the government may have an incentive to be exploiting or otherwise damaging their own people? How would this be used simply just in other court cases where the power is expanding to now suddenly thoughts are being the main basis of determining whether someone is guilty or not, even putting above actions and other evidence? Of course, this is one court case. However, it's important to understand the ramifications this decision would have. So for these reasons, that fMRI blood flow patterns may in fact not indicate lying, that Ava has a right to silence and a right to not incriminate herself, and that using someone's thoughts as evidence in a criminal case is a simply dangerous path,
Your time is up.
I strongly support the negative side. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. Suhina will now go next with the negative side, with the affirmative side. Are you ready, Suhina?
Yes.
You will have 4 minutes. Your time starts now.
From "we have a deal" to "will you still love me tomorrow?" we continue to live in fundamental uncertainty about the minds of others. But at least some of this will be unveiled due to neuroscience. And I affirm that it is for the better that neuroscience gets slowly integrated into law. And with the future in mind, the court should accept the fMRI into submission and integrate into the whole of the case. I want to clarify something immediately about the judicial process. For a criminal case, a jury will be present, and there is never one certain evidence that sentences the entire case. We must consider nuance and set precedents, which I will now prove. At the current stage, technologies like fMRI PET scans are not perfect, but is any technology really perfect? It is in fact due to its imperfectibility that we can actually start considering implementing slowly and carefully this technology into the law. I repeat, slowly, carefully, and with due process. Because when we start now, when the technology a little fuzzy, it will immensely help to set precedent when the technology in the future is much more certain and quantitative. I repeat, it is another set of factors to consider in the entire case. For example, in the legal precedent of the state of Ohio versus Gerald, Sharon Jill argued her convictions of murder were wrong because her psychological report of PTSD was wrongly dismissed by the court, and it worked out in her favor because of the basis of the case State versus Nemeth, which actually said that admission of a psychological report, battered child syndrome, is allowed. It ended up being a violation of the Sixth Amendment of the United States, which gives citizens the right to due counsel and defense. The opposition may counter with a case such as United States versus McQuarrie, where a man named McQuarrie's motion for a compassionate release due to a brain tumor was actually denied because his neurosurgeon said that he had actually fully recovered, even though he had some residual symptoms. This directly affects how in both cases, neuroscientific evidence was considered, but it didn't sway the outcome in a certain way. There is still variability and a fair trial for both people. As shown in the state of Ohio versus Gerald, not considering it is now a mistrial and is a trend that is spreading to other states. In the same manner, fMRI has been repeatedly proven to provide information about neural activity, including decoding mental content. The judicial branch is passive and it is very slow. And the more recent cases that address neural rights, the more viably we can execute due justice. There are even more proven accurate uses of fMRI, which by allowing the submission of this evidence to just be considered, we can open up law to it. According to the New England Journal of Medicine, fMRI can be used to accurately detect levels of pain, which can also immensely help in other cases like personal injury, where many people commonly lie for a bigger payout, ruining lives. Such technologies are a neutral extension of current uses of actuarial information, such as your name, your gender, your income level. I agree. It is wrong to assume that neuroscience is going to magically solve all of our issue, but it is actually responsible, necessary, and prudent that we consider its possibility of removing subjectivity as we experience more neuroscientific breakthroughs, tackling our problems at the root cause. And with the rise of crime and violence in the United States, with 1.23 million violent crimes each year, wouldn't you want your peers, your friends, your family, your future children, and even you to be more protected as well as we go into the future?
Thank you for your response. That was a perfect 4 minutes. We will now move on to the crossfire section. You'll have 2 minutes to ask questions. Are you both ready?
Yeah.
Your time starts now.
So my first question for you is, how do you argue against the question that considering neuroscience evidence is going to be inevitable because these technologies are only going to keep getting better and better? And something that you mentioned, a lot of it is that legal precedent and ramifications are important, which I do agree with. But a lot of the arguments that you make were also similarly made for the insanity defense back in the past. But now in our current situation, the insanity defense is one of the most important cases, not only in law, but also in neuroethics, which we further establish. So how can you argue that, not considering right now isn't just similar to the same precedents that have already been set?
Well, there's a very big difference between a new technology where the correlation has not fully been proven and something that's been proven over decades of research. The insanity defense has had a lot of research done into it. And while fMRIs themselves are reliable machines, this correlation of blood flow and lying is a new theory and has not been sufficiently proven to the level that it can be used in court cases. We could revisit this question later down the line and say, if this was really proven 100% every single time that someone was lying, they had this exact brain pattern, we could revisit the question, but that would be an entirely different debate because at this point in time, it's not certain.
So that's exactly my point though, because it's not entirely certain. Nothing is entirely certain. What we rely on right now are expert witnesses that have also been proven many times to be biased, to have their own fallacies and their own expert opinions. And this fMRI, once again, provides another method of consideration. It is not the final determining factor, as I've also proven.
Your time is up.
Okay.
We will now have a quiet preparation period for the rebuttals. You have 2 minutes. Your time starts now. Fellow debaters, your time is up. We will now move into the rebuttal portion of the debate. You each will get 4 minutes to present a rebuttal. Ashley will go first and Suhina will go second. Are you ready, Ashley?
Yep.
Your time starts now.
First, I'll be addressing first explaining my opponent's points and then addressing these points with my own critiques and then going into some of the debate in the crossfire. So first, my opponent was talking about how the jury is the one having the final say, not any specific evidence. However, juries can be biased. Think of what happened with faulty DNA kits becoming suddenly the final say in many cases. Juries just accepted these as fact, partially because of shows like CSI and other criminal justice shows portraying them in this way, and partially because, according to the American Psychological Association, judges rarely told juries that these DNA kits were sometimes inaccurate, and popular perception made them the deciding factor, not them inherently or their merits. This could clearly happen again with the example of these fMRI scans where nobody specifically says that they're the deciding case. And of course, the jury is the one deciding at the end of the day. However, they may not have access to a scientific background or proper understanding of what's really going on with these scans, and they may accept them to be more weighty than they really are. Then my opponent was talking about how anything to help solve crime and make things safer is worth it. However, I would actually disagree. It's better to not wrongfully convict people, which is consistent with American policy on criminal justice, which is that it's better to let a criminal walk free than imprison an innocent person, because there can always be appeals and multiple trials to have someone who is said to be innocent when they are guilty in order to reach justice. However, imprisoning an innocent person will damage them for the rest of their lives. Now, to discuss something that came up in Crossfire, the difference between this and the insanity defense, which we were running out of time a little bit towards the end. However, there's a myriad of different reasons why this is actually very distinct. First, as I talked about in the Crossfire, the threshold of proof, in that the insanity defense there's been a lot of studies going into it, a lot of research going into it, whereas this new fMRI scans, it's not fully been proven that lying will actually correlate with these blood flows every time, or even most of the time. The study results on this topic have been mixed, and it's not fair to let something with a imperfect record be impacting who goes to jail and who walks free. Additionally, there's a more moral difference between the two, and that is the difference between a diagnosed condition and in the moment thoughts. Whereas people, of course, can't control what mental illnesses they have, they can control what treatments they get, they can control what they do about mental illness, they can control many more factors about that. However, moment thoughts, as Ava is having as she's in scan question, potentially having the wrong results simply because she's scared or very concentrated reasonably based on the situation she's in, those are things that she does not have control of. She does not control where the blood flows in her brain, meaning she is not getting the right to not incriminate herself. And I think that this is one of the key points in this debate that's been a bit overlooked. So I'm just going to reiterate my points before I finish. fMRI blood flow patterns may not indicate lying. Ava should have her right to silence and her right to not incriminate herself, and using someone's thoughts as evidence in a criminal case is a dangerous precedent to set.
Your time is up.
Okay, thank you. And I urge support of the negative side.
Thank you, Ashley. Suhina, you will go next. Are you ready?
Yes.
You have 4 minutes. Your time starts now.
Once again, I would like to affirm my case that the evidence ought to be submitted to the court. Another legal precedent that supports my case was, and the trend of actually this spreading from Ohio to other states, is in Kansas. The Kansas Act was defining someone who is a sexually violent predator as anyone who was convicted with such an offense and who also suffers from a mental abnormality. In Kansas versus Hendricks, The court held that act constitutional against the substantive due process claim because it required, in addition to the expert opinion, substantial proof of dangerousness, proving and setting a pathway for more refined imaging techniques, such as the fMRI, to be used. Additionally, I would like to address the topic of blood flow patterns because actually the Journal of American Psychiatry and Law states that the sensitivity for detection of lying in the exact blood flow pattern was around 90% and the specificity was around 86%. That's pretty darn good. Nothing can ever be perfect, but it has been proven to be pretty accurate in real world situations. Also, neuroscience cannot be compared to the objectivity of DNA. They are two separate fields, and one is definitely more holistic than the other. It becomes a whole nother debate, and neuroscience can provide more objectivity than current lie detection techniques, because the concept behind current polygraph machines seeks only to measure sweating, blood rate, or breathing rate, blood pressure, etc. But this easily excludes psychopaths and sociopaths, people who are amazing at lines and can remain calm, but are also the most dangerous members of our society. Do we just let them get away? Additionally, the accuracy of polygraphs are much lower than 90% and cannot even be used in court. And as in a federal Supreme Court case, US versus Semrau, there was an openness for considering an even more lie detection technology, aka the fMRI, in the future. For my last point, I also want to say that this has already been done. For what may be the first time, fMRI scans in 2009 were actively used as evidence in the Janine Nicarico case, which was a murder trial. Defense lawyers for an Illinois man convicted of killing a 10-year-old girl used the scans in court to argue that their client should be spared the death penalty because he has a brain disorder and he couldn't understand what he was doing. And it worked. This only shows that fMRI actually bolsters the current insanity defense. And since it's already been used so past in 2009, it is now 2022. It is about time we start looking to the future and we start truly understanding the ramifications of neurotechnology, and it is only getting better and better and better. And we owe that responsibility to the future generations who will now be subject to this kind of technology.
Thank you for your response. All right, debaters, we will now have a crossfire period for 2 minutes. Are you both ready? All right, your time starts now.
Okay, so what do you think would happen to someone who is part of those 1 in 10 people, as the figure is 90%, who was simply concentrating hard, as would be reasonable in a criminal case, and was wrongfully convicted as a result?
Well, I would argue that the eyewitnesses are even more unreliable. There have been many studies that disprove that memories are easily altered, that there is a lot of bias. So 9 in 10 is a very good statistic as compared to lower statistics of existing lie detection and existing wavering of memory. And once again, I also want to reiterate that this is not the only evidence. It's definitely not as subjective as fake DNA kits, because this is also taken in context of age and other normal pieces of evidence that we use. And you also mentioned the jury not being the only being subject to bias, but I also want to add that the judge actually determines what evidence gets entered into court. And I've explained in many different cases that there are many cases where sometimes it does get accepted and sometimes it doesn't. So it's not like neurotechnology is going to just be a certain, once it's in, it's going to completely sentence someone for good. There is due process and common sense being used. So with such a reliable technology, I'm advocating that it should at least be considered.
Do you have a question? Oh, sorry, I asked, do you have a question for me?
I do have a question. I also wanted to ask how can you address the right to self-incrimination when she has already waived that by testifying and by repeatedly coming to court and saying it? She has yes, she has it right, but now she has waived it.
Your time is up. We will now move into a quiet preparation period for the closings. You will have 2 minutes. Your time starts now. Hello debaters, your time is up. We will now be moving into the closings portion of the debate. Ashley will go first and Suhina will go second. Ashley, are you ready?
Yep.
You have 2 minutes. Your time starts now.
Okay, so fMRI patterns in conclusion are dangerous to use in court for three main reasons, as I've been discussing. One, the correlation, the simple numbers. My opponent said that the tests were 90% accurate. Some studies found that they were as low as 70, but even 90%, that's 1 in 10 that are being wrong, that are incorrect. Additionally, these studies were often in much lower stress scenarios than a courtroom, and stress could change results because it's all about your thinking and emotions and thought patterns. Secondly, rights. Ava does not know what the fMRI will show, and she has a right to not incriminate herself that she has not waived, in fact, because she did choose to stay silent, as noted in the case description, contrary to what my opponent was saying in the end of Crossfire. And finally, precedent. Thoughts are not actions. Thoughts are not mental illnesses. Thoughts are not disorders. Thoughts are thoughts. These are internal thoughts that we are having that do not always correspond with our actions, do not always correspond with reality, and we cannot be judging someone based on their thoughts. This is a dangerous precedent to set that can cause dangerous results in the future and in this particular case. As I mentioned, juries can often be swayed by the promise of, oh, this is new technology, it's infallible, look at it, it's so new and cutting edge, when it's in fact not, and there is a wide margin of error. And so juries could be using this as a major decider in the case when, because of the correlations, Ava's rights, and future precedent, is a dangerous thing to use. I thank you, and I strongly support the negative side in that the court should reject the fMRI data from being included in the evidence the prosecuting lawyer presents.
Thank you for your response. Suhina, are you ready? You have 2 minutes. Your time starts now.
I would once again like to give a quick summary of all the legal precedents that have debunked my opposition's case and that the fMRI should be submitted into the court. Again, the Janine Nicarico murder case in 2009 really did submit the use of fMRI already, and this trend and legal precedent should be taken forward. A 9 in 10 rate, or even as my opposition states, even a 7 in 10 rate, is still so much better compared to the fallacy of eyewitnesses, as according to the Congressional Rights Foundation, 52% of errors resulted from eyewitness mistakes. Even if you go by 17%, that is still so much better. It's 5 versus 1 person of risk. Besides, thoughts are not just thoughts. They are the means by which we diagnose psychiatric disorders already. Why is it then, if thoughts are just thoughts? In therapy, we report someone's thoughts and plans if they plan to hurt themselves or others. Why is there mandated reporting them? Again, may I emphasize that the judge picks the evidence that is submitted. And I strongly support the affirmative side, as its submission will only be part of a holistic view of the case. The lawyers will still get to make their arguments. And by not doing so, you are actually violating another precedent already existed by the Sixth Amendment and by the Ohio versus Jenner case, which is that if this is not submitted and it is not considered, it is actually a violation of her due process and her due counsel. Because if she did commit the crime and she gets away with it, that is someone not gaining true process and true due justice. So once again, I implore you to at least submit this evidence and look into the future, because it is the consideration of the future that affects not only us, but the people around us as well. Thank you.
Thank you for your response. And thank you, Ashley and Suhina, for your closing statements.
All right, everyone. That was intense. Great job to both of you. Everyone, if we could give them a big round of applause for a job very, very well done, extraordinarily well done. Now, this is once again going to be really tough. So let's give the judges a few moments in the breakout room to go ahead and deliberate. Could do that as well, Olivia, to answer your question. I can also help out in the breakout room if needed. Give me one moment. So I think we have Nadeshka, we have Monica, Olivia, and Vivian. I don't believe Vivian's here, so there you are. And I'm recording a staple today. So Ashley's our first place winner. Suhina's our second place winner. Recap for the folks on YouTube. Thanks again, both of y'all, for your outstanding arguments. I think there's just such wonderful points that you have synthesized and brought up. And congrats to everyone competing here as well today. And thanks for coming on to cheer your fellow competitors. Really awesome to hear all of your viewpoints come to life today. And also shout out to everyone who's in very odd time zones and still here with us. Y'all are true MVPs, so thank you for that. Wonderful. So Suhina, Ashley, we'll also be following up with y'all via email, as mentioned before, with Maanit and Swasna. So keep an eye out on your email inbox. And I think that's all for announcements, Intra.
Yeah, we're good. Thank you and congratulations to you both.
Yeah, the finale to what an exciting saga today.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I had an amazing time.
Thank you. So